Okay, we're rolling, Ravi. Thanks for joining me, my friend.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, we met through Jari, and Jari's actually been on my podcast before. We had a lot of fun, and I went on his, and we had a ton of fun. But um, but I'm really glad that we met. You own a company called My Sutro, which is for which is for pools. Now, I'm curious. Before we talk about that, is that the first? Is this your first big entrepreneurial venture, or is this one of many?
I feel like I've kind of always been stuck in kind of around entrepreneurship. There's like 99% failed ventures. This I would say is the probably the most successful one. I mean that I've had.
Yeah.
But in the past, I had a few that hadn't been picked up. I used to be in the impact investing market, and we basically
Okay.
created like a kind of like a crunch base for impact called Impact Space.
Oh wow.
Um, the team is actually still there, and they work with a company called Impact Alpha, run by David Bank, and so
Oh cool.
that's like still running actually really really well. And yeah, and
Wow.
then my dad's kind of always been in entrepreneurship, so I was always around, working actually at the pool store that my dad had.
Yeah.
Always coming up with small little things or figuring out how to kind of fix one thing or the other.
I read that you. That's kind of where the idea for My Sutro came from. Was you were working around your dad's pool shop? Tell us that story because that's really fun.
Yeah, so imagine the sunny streets of Southern California. Dad had a chain of pool and spa supply stores, and I grew up right doing everything from acid washes to installing pumps to cleaning pools, and the idea for Sutro kind of initially came about of how do I take everything I used to do at my dad's pool store and basically package it inside of a robot. That's kind of how we started targeting the actual pool industry.
Oh wow. So now tell everybody what Sutro is and how that kind of works.
Yeah. So Sutro is basically a robot that floats in your swimming pool. It measures your pH, free chlorine, alkalinity, right? Those like the little test kit that you have. We've basically taken that test kit, shoved it inside of a robot, and then we have an application that tells you exactly what chemicals to put in and when. And so it's a pretty simple concept. It just basically automates the existing process of you testing your water.
That's pretty sweet. And do you sell the chemicals too?
We do not sell the chemicals. One thing I learned from being at my dad's pool and spa supply store is the revenues that are made at the pool store are primarily done through actually chemical and chemical sales. And
Okay.
so we didn't want to come in Silicon Valley disruption terms and break the entire industry down. So we wanted to work within the confines and also help dealers and the service technicians that already build the infrastructure for the pool and spa market.
Oh, okay, cool. So it's kind of like a partnership. So you work with like the distributors and things like that. So you don't want to infringe on what they're selling. So you kind of work together. Is that kind of the idea behind that?
Yeah, exactly. So like imagine your, neighborhood pool and spa supply store, right? You're in Austin or Los Angeles,
Yeah.
your dad's pool store, Magnolia Pool and Spa Supplies. And what we do is we basically built kind of a dual-sided platform. I think of it as like Uber. There's the drivers and then there's the
Yeah.
there's the riders. There's the customers that obviously have swimming pools. And then what we do
Yeah.
is we have a dealer portal, which allows swimming pool dealers and pool stores to better treat their chemicals with the data from the actual Sutro devices in their swimming pool.
Oh
So yeah,
wow.
kind of this two-sided platform.
Oh wow, that's really awesome. Um, so now tell us the story of how your dad got into the pool and spa supply game, because this is what I always find fascinating, and this is kind of what we talked about before the podcast, which is the thesis of the podcast. Is like you have these one-off industries that you never think, like you wouldn't think that in today's like hustle culture or anything like that, like I'm going to go sell pool supply stores. So but it's a really awesome opportunity. Like I've seen your store, you guys are crushing it. How did this come to be? Like where did the idea come from?
Yeah, so kind of two interesting threads there. So my dad, my parents are both immigrants from India, and they came here in the 80s. My dad is actually, I think, has a master's in chemistry, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh wow.
So he came to the U.S., back in the 80s, and couldn't really find a job. And so he was a pool boy, right? He was running around running pools, cleaning them. At one point in time, I think he entered like a pool store at the time in Riverside, California, and I think the store owners wanted to take like a lunch break, and they're like, "Hey Harry, come back here. Can you just like manage the front of the shop for like an hour? We'll be back from our lunch break. Just test water, sell the chemicals to the customers. You know the shtick."
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he was over there, and obviously he was a trained chemist. And so when these customers would come in, he was like testing the water, right? I mean, he like knew what he was
Yeah.
talking about. And so I think like a week or two later, some of these return customers came back, and the owners called him up, and they were like, "Hey Harry, like what did you do when you were at the store?
Right.
How do you know so much about chemistry that you're able to do this?" And he's like, "Well, funny story, I'm actually a master's in chemistry." And they're like, "What are you doing out there in the, servicing pools? You should be back here in the store. Let's help you do that." From that, he grew that one store to 30 stores back in the day. He's since retired. But yeah, I grew
Whoa.
up through high school with, my life of kind of him growing up this pool store chain. And so that was kind of the, first part of him and building out this pool store side of thing. And then the kind of second thread that actually lent me to first build the technology was when I actually used to run a small VC fund in India. So I was helping Village Capital out, which is an impact investing fund, and part of the thesis was to invest in companies who made products for people who earned less than $2 a day, right? So this is kind of this
Oh,
like bottom of the pyramid, people who live in extreme poverty. And so the business models become really, really interesting when you have economics like that. And a lot of the deal flow that we saw was around water filtration, but nobody was doing anything in water sensing, right? So if you're gonna fix the water through filtration, you kind of have to know how to sense it. You have to know what's wrong with it, right? And
yeah.
so that's kind of where this idea for the water sensor first came about. Stupidest thing a startup can ever do is trying to sell to the Indian government. You'll like cash by the time you actually, actually sell one device. And so
Yeah.
coming back to the US, those two threads kind of hit each other. And I'm like, well, let's switch the model around. Let's sell to wealthier pool owners initially. The sensor structure overall is the same. And then the vision for the company is still remains, right? We do want to eventually go into agriculture, food and beverage, drinking water, all those applications I looked at when I was in India.
Oh wow. Okay, so how does this apply to those industries? Um yeah, like expound a little more on your vision because that's really cool.
Yeah, so water and water within applications is actually a really interesting process additive, let's call it that, right? Like, so let's take a really simple example. If you're in the Central Valley in California and you're growing, let's say, tomatoes, usually what you'll do is you'll obviously plant the tomatoes, and they have a certain growing cycle, right? So they'll have like a 9 month
Yeah.
cycle. I don't know what the cycle is, but let's just say it's 9 months. What happens at that particular point in time is you need to water the tomatoes. You need to, at certain points in its life stages, you need to give it more or less nutrients, more phosphates, more nitrates, whatever the fertilizers are. And so water in many times is used as a transfer agent to actually get those nutrients into the soil, right? So in that sense, if you understood the quality of water when you're growing your tomatoes, you could more efficiently grow tomatoes and make less waste. If you have drinking water, right? Drinking water travels through the pipes. This issue in Flint, Michigan, with
Oh, geez.
the lead in the drinking water, um, should have been solved through sensing devices, right? And I think we didn't find it out until it actually hit the point of consumption because the stream was changed, or the source was changed upstream. And
Yeah.
so, if you look at where water is used in the majority of applications around the world, where like the majority of it is in industrial settings, it's in drinking water, it's in agriculture, it's in cooling our buildings, right? Cooling water towers use a lot of water.
Yeah.
And so the way that I look at swimming pools is it's a niche of a niche of a niche. It's a way for us to like look and build this initial idea and seed it within the larger realm of what actually we want to do in the future.
Wow. So right now the pool kind of industry is a, like your kind of proving grounds in a sense to kind of
Exactly.
help
Yeah.
get everything ready to go, and then you're gonna. And
Mhm.
so what does that look like? Is the model the same? Are you planning on putting robots like in in the systems to have that report back then?
Yes and no. I mean, I think,
Okay,
like manifestations or execution of it could be different, right? It
sure.
won't be a floating robot in like a big tube that's under the ground. Maybe, there's one that's in line, like it's actually baked into the pipe itself.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
there's obviously, the pool one that actually floats in the water. We could take samples, and pull them out and then run them off site. There's kind of multiple ways that we can solve that problem. It's not, yeah, I don't think it always has to be it floating
Yeah,
necessarily in the water.
that's cool. When you said like bake it into the pipe, I was like, that would be cool.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
one of the
dope.
things we are actually working on is how do you do that in the pool industry too, right? Because
Oh yeah, wow.
pool pumps are mini water circulation systems. They're a very similar circulation system to the one that you'd have in drinking water. And
Yeah.
so again, back to that testing ground analogy, we are, seeing how we can push and pull the buttons and pull up and down the levers in the pool industry to see how that actually will relate to stuff that we're doing outside.
Yeah. So what kind of thought process did you go through, and what kind of journey did you go through personally to, because you mentioned that initially the idea was the drinking water and everything like that, but then you had to pivot and switch. And I'm curious like what sparked that, and what was your kind of like your thought process going through that? What made you think that that was the right move?
Yeah, I think it honestly just breaks down to needs, right?
Yeah.
Like if the sales cycle is so long and being in India when I was, I just don't think we could have survived that as a company, right? And so
Right, right.
pivoting was like, how do we get this deployed as quick as possible with the least amount of capital in a market that can afford us the most amount of capital? So that was the equation. And then, obviously my dad owning pool and spa supply chains made it all the more, um, interesting to actually go into the pool and spa industry.
Yeah, you had all those connections ready to go, and
Yeah.
yeah, and it was pretty awesome. So what did people I mean, what do they think when you have this idea? I mean, you guys are doing really well, but is it well accepted in the pool industry, or is that kind of, cuz I know like people sometimes they get hired to come out and test your pool, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we actually support those people. Those are pool service technicians. We
Okay.
have a program actually for them. So kind of backing up for a second, right? If you look at the US pool and spa industry, um, around 12% of US households have a recreational form of water in their backyard. That's a pool or a spa.
Oh
Um,
wow.
so around 14 to 15 million pools and spas actually in the US market.
Yeah.
Um, out of that, 10% of that market actually is serviced by these pool service technicians, these pool boys, right? And also pool
Yeah.
girls, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then 95% of them, or sorry, what did I say? 10%,
Yeah.
15%, sorry. 15% are actually serviced by pool service technicians. 85% are do-it-yourselfers, DIYers, right? So
Yeah.
they'll go to a pool store, they'll go to a Home Depot, they'll go to a Walmart, test their own water, pick up their own chemicals.
Yeah.
If you zoom into this 85%, that's our major market, right? It's to help people that manage their own bodies of water to have safe drinking water or safe swimming water in their
Mhm.
backyards to actually swim in. Um, and like I said, we also do help the 10% or the 15% of those pool service technicians, because imagine, Joe's pool and spa service. He wakes up on a Monday morning, looks at his cell phone, and he can scroll through the 100 pools that he services to know exactly what pools to go into and not. And that's Sutro powering that dashboard
Oh.
and what to do, right? So he can now be more efficient with his route, so he doesn't spend as much time just blindly driving around in circles trying to treat all 100 pools. So we do
Yeah.
for those guys too.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, who wouldn't want to do that? I would
Yeah.
imagine that it gets kind of frustrating.
And
It gets
and
kind of
now
frustrating when you like get to a pool and you don't need to do anything to it. You're like, "Ah, okay."
yeah, exactly, right? And then the worst thing is the pool that you didn't go to is the one that's green. And,
Oh,
hey,
right.
this
Yeah.
customer, what's wrong? Oh, well, you didn't come out. My pool's green. And it's like, well, I didn't know. Right. So,
So that's really cool. So now you mentioned that Sutro wasn't the first. So what would you consider your official start of entrepreneurship? Like what was your first like for you start?
um, like, I think I would probably, it's kind of funny in like high school. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
we like started the ping pong club. I think like that was my like first foray at like entrepreneurship, right? Starting a club
Okay.
at school, recruiting members, building out marketing and messaging. Um, and then after that, actually, I started an organization in undergrad called Isagi, International Service and Global Impact. And what we did with that program was we would partner with the study abroad students, right, that were already going out from university to study in Brazil or Peru or India. And what we would do is we would actually have like a matchmaking program that paired them with volunteering efforts in the country that they were living in.
Oh
Um,
wow.
and so we actually launched two projects while I was there. One in Peru that was connecting via technology people in the village and the cities. And then the second one was in Brazil, where we were working with an orphanage to actually kind of build a mobile medical clinic for the orphanage. And
Whoa.
yeah, so those were kind of the two projects I would call as my foray to entrepreneurship.
Wow. So walk me through that first one. You said it was for foreign exchange or excuse me. Right, was that right? Foreign exchange students
Yeah,
basically and partnering them up with so how did that all come about?
we just, I mean, honestly
Like
saw a
where was
need.
the idea? Yeah, the idea. Yeah, what was the need? What was the problem?
Yeah, it's like these students are out there studying, and
Yeah.
there's people that obviously need assistance when they're working with these nonprofit projects or whatever sort of volunteering projects that they had.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so this matchmaking allowed us to basically get more resources to these projects to help them. And then the students also felt good because now they were able to actively, participate in this country that they're studying in. Outside of the partying that they're already doing, they can also on
Yeah.
a weekend do a nice thing. And so
Right.
that was kind of the impetus of it.
Oh, that's awesome. Holy cow. Well, that's a really cool opportunity. And then tell me more about the mobile medical clinic in Brazil. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, so that was probably one of the projects I like remember the most. It was in a small city in I think like the northern part of Brazil called Fortaleza, uh,
Uh-huh.
and we basically worked at an all girls orphanage there. And these girls had actually been sold into basically sex slavery,
Oh,
for like lack
geez.
of a better term or a worse term. And they were, I mean, oh my gosh, these girls were like 8 years old, 12 years old, 15. They were like really, really young.
Oh,
And
wow.
so they just, lived in the city in Fortaleza outside the city limits. And what they really lacked was actually medical care, right, in this particular area and this orphanage in particular. And so what we did was we just brought kind of basic medical needs, like vaccines, some just simple medicines when people got sick, so that
Wow.
these kind of issues wouldn't spiral out of control from like a medical standpoint. And so
Wow.
yeah, that was that project.
Wow, that's insane. So how did you get involved with all of these different um, kind of organizations? Was this through networking or was it part of like your undergrad or how did that all come about?
No, my undergrad's actually in mechanical engineering with a minor
Oh,
in
okay.
fluid, and like a minor in fluid dynamics. So I definitely am not a humanitarian or an MPA, or I didn't study any of that.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, I was in the School of Engineering. So
Oh, that's nice. So how did you get involved? What was that process like?
we found the nonprofits just by creating the network. Like honestly, we
Yeah.
created this platform and we kind of did the other side of it. And we're like, hey, look, we have students in these particular geographies. If you have projects, please submit them. Right. And so we also worked with a lot of the professors in the college. We worked with the associated student body. And so we just really tried to like pull together as much as we could to make sure that we had the right pairing of projects to students.
Oh wow, that's incredible. Um, that's awesome. And so now, so Q Sutro, which is now your project and everything you have going on. And that's how you met. It now. How did you meet? Um, how did you meet Jari?
I met Jari through Sam Parr, actually. So Sam Parr used to be at the Founder Dojo in
Okay.
San Francisco, and he's the founder of The Hustle, if you've heard of The Hustle.
Yeah. Okay, Sam Parr. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I met Jari through Sean Puri's course,
Oh,
power
yeah, yeah,
writing
yeah.
course. Okay.
So same people of the other side of the spectrum.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and so yeah, that's where I met Jari, and he actually interviewed me for his book, The Entrepreneur's Ethos, that he first started writing. I think it was like 5 years ago.
Yeah,
And
great
since
book.
then, we've kind of been friends. He helped out with Sutro. I'm kind of helping him out with this new brand story guide and product market fit product that we're looking at. But yeah. That's how I met Jari.
Yeah, we're gonna have to have both of you on one day to talk about the project you guys have going on right now. But could you tell us a little more about that? The product. It's a product market fit kind of like story to helping business owners tell the story, right?
Yeah. So it initially seeds at basically humans want to like understand and tell stories, right? We are storytelling creatures
Yeah.
at the base of our kind of existence, right?
Yeah, of course.
That's why we dream, that's why we talk, that's why we buy particular products. And so yeah, I mean, I think in that particular thing as an essence, what what we want to do is obviously companies are nothing but glorified stories, right? They're stories that solve problems that people have, right? Sutro is a
Right.
story. Um,
Right.
and Sutro is a story that solves a particular problem. And
Yeah.
so basically what the brand story guide is it's a kind of three-part module, right? The first part is basically what we call the brand story guide. And the brand story guide builds a narrative for your company as a story, right? So how do you turn your company into a story is the best way to think about the brand story guide.
Yeah.
What we have is actually once you start executing that story, we have what's called the product market fit, which was best used by Rahul Vora from Superhuman. And what that does is it's continuous iteration and questioning to make sure that you're building the right thing for the right demographic based off of that story that we first came up with.
Yeah.
And then the kind of third piece about this is PLG, or product led growth, which is as you're using the product market fit and the brand story guide, the storytelling and the product building, are you building the right product to make sure that you're building it sticky enough? And so those three things kind of combined together is like a 3 module part series on the best, on the way to kind of build your company through a storytelling lens. And so that's kind of what we're working on now.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, product led growth. That's like a buzzword in private equity and venture capital, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
everybody wants to find the next product led company, right? Product led
exactly.
growth company, yeah. So, but walk us through like what makes a company product led growth, or what makes growth product led.
Yeah, so I think it's actually best to start off with the product market fit survey.
Okay.
So so like the way that Rahul Vora actually explains this, we traditionally you'll see an NPS, an net promoter score, right?
Yeah.
The way that the product market fit is structured is the first question is how disappointed would you be if you could no longer have this product? Right? What that
Oh yeah.
basically means is it flips the decision to be like, if I was to pull this away from you, how disappointed would you be? Like, would you
Yeah.
be very disappointed, somewhat disappointed, or not disappointed? If you're very disappointed, you're probably like this product inherently solves a need for you, right? And if I pull it away
Yeah.
from you, it's like chopping off your right arm, right? I'd be very disappointed if I didn't have my right arm, right? Like something that you're so dependent on, like my cell phone, right? I would probably be very disappointed if you took that away from me. Um,
Sure. We all would.
yeah, exactly. And then there's products that you would not be, or you'd be somewhat disappointed. Um, the next question that we ask is basically what are we doing right, right? Like what do you like about the product? And those are things, that we're doing well, which means that
Yeah.
actually ties up into the marketing of the product to make sure that we do those things consistently well. The next question is what could we do better, right? Obviously. So this now goes into improvements on the way that we can actually fix the product. And the last question is, how would you define the ideal Sutro user? Or like, how would you define a user that used this product? When you ask that question, 9 times out of 10, you're just going to describe yourself, right? So now what that does is it builds a persona for the people that are using your product. And what you start to do is you self-select for people that are going to be very disappointed, right? So out of the cohort of people said that they would be very disappointed, you then make sure that you fix the things that they think are broken, because that's what's going to get more of those people to buy it. And the things that they said that they're doing really well, you make sure to continue to do that, or build on top of it to make sure that it's even more stickier. And the thing that they use to define themselves goes to your digital marketing team, so that you can build Facebook ads that uses the persona analysis to properly actually aggregate what that person looks like in a certain sense. And that's how you build product-led growth, because then if you input those features into your product, the PM fit survey, the product market fit survey, is what's providing the feedback for the product-led growth to make it even more and more sticky, so people keep driving into that product.
Yeah, holy cow. You brought up Facebook, and I might go off on a little tangent here, but man, Facebook's been wild the last few weeks, huh?
In like what ways? With like ads and iOS stuff, or like
ads, iOS,
yeah.
What Peter Thiel just stepped down, right?
Yeah.
He's out. They just reported their forecasted earnings came in lower.
Mm-hmm.
Or their actual earnings came in lower than forecasting. And so now everybody's got the butt. And then there's some like Twitter, like delete Facebook, but that comes up on Twitter like every 6 months or something like that. Yeah, I'm not too worried about that, but you know what I mean? Yeah. But I'm just like, what's kind of the future of advertising? I'm curious to hear your thoughts, especially as like a business owner and somebody who's kind of expanding into like helping other business owners work this out. But like, I read an interesting thread the other day, kind of about the future of like maybe social media ads and things like that. But I'm curious, is this something you've thought about or have talked about with anybody in your circle?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to answer that question is to go back to the basics, right? If you go back to what my dad did 20 years, 18 years ago, retail at that time, right? Like your brick and mortar business had their own customer base, and they would have, traffic coming on the road, and they would basically attract customers that way. All that to say, yeah. I'm not suggesting that we open up a bunch of brick and mortar stores and like actually take road traffic. I think it's going into owning your own particular customer cohort, right?
Yeah.
Top of funnel, I get it. Like, where are you going to get those customers from the very beginning? Because Facebook was a great top of funnel acquisition strategy. Yeah. You have to get like innovative of how you're going to actually target your customers. And in our case, that goes back to our pool stores, right? We want to make life so easy for pool stores and make their business so strong that they will eventually get Sutros into their end customers, because we drive traffic back to that pool store. Or we want to work with service technicians, because those pool boys will deploy 100 Sutros into their 100 pools, and that gets more Sutros deployed.
Yeah.
And that's happening through trade organizations, right? That's happening through being in like pool and spa magazines. And so I think for every single product that's out there, there's probably an alternate sales method that's not Facebook, right? I think like,
yeah,
we depended a lot on Facebook, but we just have to think outside the box now of how are we going to actually acquire users and make friends family, right? That's like, that's like really what you're trying to do.
Yeah, because it's just, it seems to me like, because when I think of like social media, it's changed a ton. Like, I think really the only thing left like that you can really organically build on is maybe LinkedIn and TikTok. But because TikTok's just the Wild West, they don't care.
Yeah.
Right? There's no algorithm on that thing, man, anymore anyway,
Exactly.
So, and LinkedIn is kind of losing that. Like LinkedIn a couple of years ago was probably where TikTok is right now. But it's just curious, because now I feel like some of these social media platforms are kind of turning into more of like, just put content up. Like Instagram's a great example. Like, I don't really know a lot of people who advertise on Instagram other than just simply through like content creation, right? And trying to like build an audience, which is, by the way, nothing wrong with that, but it's kind of defeating what it used to be, which is like Facebook, which is like ads. And I mean, whole industries are made off of capitalizing on Facebook ads. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't know. I don't know where that's going anymore though.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can find a lot of promise in groups, right? A lot of people are going to Facebook groups,
Yeah, yeah,
these
yeah,
kind of curated places that people can congregate digitally.
yeah,
Um, I think like with the kind of older part of our market, phone is really good with us, right? Like we can go to the white pages and get phone
yeah.
numbers and honestly like call up people and say, hey, like, look, we know you have a swimming pool. Would you be interested in a Sutro?
Oh,
It's
that's cool.
it's like boots on the ground, like, hard work, quote unquote. You're not like sitting there with a digital media buyer that can spray and pray
Sure.
ads everywhere. But
Yeah,
maybe you tie a phone strategy with Facebook retargeting given a group with like an email, right? Like I think there's ways to massage with like omni-channel that's not just like let's go ahead and throw $1 million into Facebook and just like, put a bunch of
yeah.
ads
See what
down.
happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And how does
Yeah.
that play out in your story brand with business owners who are creating a story? I mean, you kind of mentioned that's kind of towards the end when you've got the story, you've got the product market fit, you got the product all ready to go. But how do you kind of mold in advertising or like these Facebook ads in with the story?
Yeah, so that's part of actually the part of the brand story guide as well.
Okay.
Uh, so if you think about the brand story guide and you and your user journey, you start off not knowing something and then you start off like becoming very familiar and then buying it, right? Basically,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's multiple ways that these like Facebook groups or an email or a phone call can touch you in various different ways to like get you to actually be interested in the product. And so we kind of have these multiple phases in the brand story guide, the same way that you would have in a story, right? You would have the exposition, you'd have the climax, and then you'd have like the kind of conclusion. And that's the same journey that you're taking as a user through an actual brand story guide process of your company. So let's take Sutro, for example, right? If you don't know what the Sutro is to begin with, we probably know that you have a swimming pool at the very least, right? Because you're a
Yeah.
qualified user. Out of that, I have to first convince you that the problem that you have is a problem that you have. And that's part of, again, like step one of the brand story guide of like testing your pool really sucks. Like having a green pool is horrible. Like, don't you hate it when
Yeah.
your second birthday party's coming up and your wife yells at you because you like had a green pool? Like that's not fun. Um, so- and so like these sorts of things is like the first exposition part of the story.
Yeah.
Once you come into the funnel, we obviously have like, a typical email drip funnel that tells you, the value proposition. Then you introduce the product. And all of that stuff is what I call north of buy, right? North of the buy button. Once I convince you to basically purchase the product, you're what I call south of buy, right? That's where like product led growth, that's where the entire product experience comes in. That's where we have to like invest in engagement and retention and
Yeah.
not just acquisition.
Right.
Um, and so I call everybody north of buy somebody that's a friend, and I call everybody that's south of buy somebody that's family, right? And so how
Oh
do you
yeah.
into family? And so
Yeah.
that's the same entire thing, all taken through the lens of storytelling, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a really good point because I like that. How do you turn friends into family? Because now with like companies and it's kind of shifting back. Isn't it crazy how we go full circle with all of this stuff? Like like with your father, right? Starts in these small brick and mortar places and your goal in that time is to own the block, right? Like own your
Yeah.
neighborhood. Like when I worked in a dealership in a suburb town, car dealership, and that
Mhm.
was our whole thing. It was like we were in Salt Lake City, but our only goal, like the way that we could win overall in Honda's eyes, we found out is if we owned our backyard. That's what we would say, right? Like own our backyard. So we really invested in like nobody should go past a certain point, right? Past city lines to buy a
Mhm.
Honda. And
Yeah.
and so you're like creating how do you create a community in there? And then it's funny, right? Then we get like all crazy and digital and now the world is our neighbor, right? And with social media and now we're coming back, it's groups, it's Discord
Yep.
servers full of
Discord
people that
services. It's buy local, right? Like shop from your
yeah,
neighborhood grocery store, like
right,
it's a lot of that now.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
And so now you're kind of like it went all the way out and now it's all the way back in and I think it's
Yeah.
just funny like like how can we use social media so that everybody in our backyard stays in our backyard?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
How do
yeah,
we turn friends into family?
yeah. And that's next door, for example. That's a great potential
Oh
way to
yeah.
like market today, right? So, um, yeah,
Oh, like the
I-
Nextdoor app.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, and
Wow,
so
that's cool.
as much as like Facebook is quote unquote a problem, I
Yeah.
think the issues that it's having is also an opportunity to kind of relayer the playing field, right? Or re-level the playing field.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of like a nice correction.
Yeah.
If to be honest, like it's like, all right, yeah, everybody's freaking out, and like now we're just like this, we're getting back to normal, kind of back to baseline, because this is what it was for to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Just to
Exactly.
create another community and create a group. Yeah, like for my podcast, that's what I did. I was like, I'll try to get it out to everybody. And then I was like, no, you know what? How about we just like create a community? How about we just create a little group and get everybody who's been on in the same room? And you know what I mean? And we just like, just us, right? And
Yeah.
then everybody can come as they want. And it's just funny. Like it reminds me of Gary Vee's, a few of his books. Like he wrote like the Thank You Economy, and that was kind of his big push. There was like this idea that it's come full circle. So that's
Yeah.
really fun.
Entirely. Yep.
So what do you look for when you're teaching a business how to tell its story? Where do you start?
So it actually, a lot of these companies will have websites. So what
Sure.
Jari has actually developed is this tool that'll basically, so there's two tools. There's one that actually asks the people in the company what the kind of core propositions of the company are, right? And so there's like this little questionnaire, and
Yeah.
then we actually scrape the website with basically their external facing text, and we'll say, hey, this thing maps perfectly, or there's like an issue here, like your employees and your company values are not actually seeing against the language that you're preaching to your customers.
Yeah.
And so then we'll like tweak that to basically get that to be kind of together. And then we have kind of a fully functioning brand story guide. And then what we can do is, based off of that, we have certain verticals. Like, say, for example, Sutro is what's called a performance storyline, right? And so we're the Robin to your Batman, right? The homeowner is the Batman. We're the sidekick that helps him or her like be better at their job, which is managing their swimming water. Nike is a prestige brand, right? I mean, you might argue that Nike
Yeah.
actually has shoes, but I mean, overall, a shoe is kind of a shoe. And like
Yeah.
that's or like better yet is like a Louis Vuitton bag, right? Or like a Gucci bag.
Yeah.
Um, there's probably like great bags, but like if you paid an extra $1,000, you get a Gucci, and so that's what we would call a prestige storyline.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and there's nothing right or wrong with it. It's just the storyline that company tells.
Right.
And the interesting thing is when we run this brand story guide spider through the website, we can actually like from Nike or Gucci actually pick out, and it'll come off with like a 98% confidence on prestige, or Sutro comes off with like an 85% confidence on performance. And so what we want to do is like I need to get that 85 up to like 90, 92, so that the storyline that I'm trying to pitch does come off as a performance story, as a story side of things. And
Oh
so
yeah.
that's kind of how it works, like
No, that's
tactic.
great. But when you talk about that, like it's one of the things, like I help like businesses with sales and like sales coaching as well.
Mhm.
Um and one of the things, and in my book, Sales Genius, like one of the very first chapters is like confidence, and people buy you and people like you, and stuff like that. But the ones that I use, so while you're talking, it made a lot of sense. Like I reference like brands like Ruth's Chris
Uh-huh.
Steakhouse, or the Ritz Carlton,
Yep.
right? Like, yeah, if you want to, and it's so funny, like you said, I was like, yeah, if you want to bed for the night, you don't have to stay at the Ritz,
Yep.
right? But if you want to ball out and you want an experience, then you stay at the Ritz.
Then you say at the Ritz, exactly.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And so it's like you're right. Like Motel 6, like I guess there's nothing wrong with the Motel 6, but it's just like, but the way that the Ritz pitches it, there is something wrong with the
Yeah.
Motel
Yeah.
6. You know?
And the Motel 6 also has a particular clientele, right? That they also sell a
Sure.
particular story for, right? And I think both of them have their demographics that are going to buy both of those products.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's just interesting, like how you kind of, And what else is really cool is a lot of these places, like the names are the company, and that's
Yeah.
kind of cool too. Like Patek Philippe is
Yep.
that's the guy's name, right? Ruth Chris, that was her name, or Ruth, right? Um, Ritz, that was his name.
Yep. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
thought and I thought that was cool. It's like that's their name.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of power in, like, I love that, like creating a story, selling people you, and like, is that part of, I mean, yeah, you don't have to give everything away, but like, do you kind of focus on the individual in building that story?
Yeah, yeah, very much so, which is why the
Okay.
first part of that survey is actually interviewing the internal company people, right? And so like
Yeah.
employees, the CEO, the CFO, those like organic people in the company collectively also make the storyline of what the company is, right? And you also want to make
Yeah.
sure
Yeah.
it matches with what you're actually saying. Uh,
Right.
and so, yeah, very much so. We do take that as a through line of like, what is the product that you're selling, right? Does the founder, is it, Gucci, the guy's last name that like literally stamped on this thing, right? Like, so very much so. If there is a brand like that, we would obviously take that up 100% into consideration.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, of course. And I understand that. And that's really cool. Like, it just kind of gets me out jazzed because I mean, if you're talking about building a story now, I feel like in the past, and maybe it's still kind of trickled in here, that story, like when someone says like tell a story or like storytelling, I feel like that's very ambiguous right now. Like, I feel like it's a buzzword that nobody really can define. Like, and I've tried to define it as a salesperson, like when I'm like, hey, you need to sell with a story, like I have a process of like how you can do that. um and I can tell you guys do as well. And it's just interesting because right now there's a lot of ambiguity around it. So I'm curious how you would like give hard definitions to what it means to build a story.
Yeah, so I think Packy McCormick from he actually has this really great um, blog called Not Boring.
Okay.
Um, just wrote about stories and narratives, actually, which I really like the way that he explained it. And so stories are kind of like bite-sized chunks of information, right? Think of them as like a Facebook ad or an email drip series or
Yeah.
an onboarding journey, right? Or a website, right? Like that you have on there. Those are all like miniature little stories, but in aggregate, what you've done is you've created a narrative or a narrative arc.
Hmm.
Um, Now that you have a narrative arc, you have this kind of like snake, right? That like starts at the beginning and ends at the end, kind of. Um, and what your job is as a company in building this narrative is to guide users that you want to turn from friends into family to follow that narrative arc. And your hope is, as you look into the mirror, that you echo the same problem solution set that the user is looking for, right? Because they come to your door knocking, saying, "Hey, I have a problem with my pool. I hate testing my water chemistry." First of
Hmm.
all, you need to figure out that they're saying that. And then you need to tell them a compelling story in which the thing that you're currently doing sucks and the thing that we're going to sell you actually like really helps your life.
Yeah.
And that's the narrative arc that you drive down with a series of small, trickled stories that guides the user from
Yeah.
friend.
I like that. And yeah, that's a great picture because telling the story that and making sure that it fits, like, yeah, your narrative and what you're trying to do. I think that's what I've seen is missing. And what you described very well was like, yeah, it's cool to tell a story, but telling 15 different stories doesn't really help you.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But 15 stories within the same narrative, right? Like a movie, right? There's a lot of different things going on, but eventually we're going to get to the ultimate point, and we're going to learn all these lessons throughout the way.
Yep.
It's a good
And
point.
if you think about it, your brand and your company is also a reflection of the market, right? Is
Yeah.
a reflection of like the market's problem set. And so think about it as like looking at like into a big massive mirror in which everybody's looking back at you with like problems and your product has to like reflect that perfectly.
Oh yeah.
to a particular like set of people, right? You can't make a product for everybody,
Sure.
but
Sure.
that's like the way that I think about it, and the way that you tune that mirror, the way that you change it, the way that you change your lighting, is all parts of the story and the narrative that make that reflection clearer, so that your market sees the product that you're selling them
Yeah.
at the right frequency.
Ah, that's cool. I really like that.
That's my
And
engineering. That's why I'm an engineer.
right. Yeah, that's cool. No, but it works. And that's also another really cool thing that I like to have when people come on is like, you have this engineering background, but you could and this creative outlet. You know what I mean? And it's
Mhm.
just funny because like you would never think like, engineers, like, well, in my case, right, like in my industry, like engineers don't really make the best salespeople in general, right?
Mhm.
On the curve, you know what I mean? The a good engineer and a good salesperson is an outlier
Yeah.
generally, right? Um, but it's great when you can kind of combine these things and people can break molds and you can see outliers, because what that really tells people is you don't have to fit a certain way, into the business world to make things work.
Mhm.
Like I'm an accountant too, like by trade, and a sales guy. And again, same bell curve, right? Good
Yeah.
accountants aren't good salespeople usually. I've tried. You know what I'm saying? And so it's just cool to see like the diversity of the backgrounds and like the skill sets that really drive creativity, because that's what people should get. Like, just start. You don't have. You can be, you know, have these different skill sets and make it work, and have them complement each other.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Well, I appreciate your time as well. But why don't you tell everybody where they can find Sutro and Story Brand and all of these different things you got going on?
Yeah, so Story Funnel, we're still in the kind of development phases, so
Okay.
you'll see more from that. But you could just go to jaribolander.com and you'll probably find information on there, or the
Yeah.
Entrepreneur Ethos.
Yeah.
On Sutro, you can go to mysutro.com, mysutro.com, and you can buy one today. We'll ship you a Sutro in between 3 to 5 business days anywhere across the U.S.
Oh, yes. That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ravi.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.